Hello and welcome to the Franz Van Cat interview. I'm Annette Young. The scandal that's engulfing Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation is quickly becoming the global media industry's equivalent of an Arab Spring. The Australian-born tycoon, once seen to be invincible, is now battling to save his global empire. Writer Jonathan SCHELL, who's also a fellow at the Nation Institute, who's followed closely the rise and rise of Rupert Murdoch, joins me today from New York. Jonathan SCHELL, thank you so much for joining us. To begin with, every day we're seeing new and further revelations about what's been going on at News Corp media outlets. Are we also starting to see the unravelling of Rupert Murdoch's empire, therefore?
Well, I think your analogy of the Arab Spring is a good one, and especially with Hosni Mubarak, who, as you know, is also in his 80s, like Rupert Murdoch. So I think it comes at a very vulnerable moment in the life of the enterprise, and that is sort of on the edge of a transition. And what's happened is that the son, James Murdoch, who is sort of the heir designate, seems to have been so caught up in this and so damaged by it that it really raises a question of whether he can survive. And I think that raises the question not of the sort of actual demise or bankruptcy of the institution, which seems very unlikely, it's very wealthy and powerful, but that it's really received a kind of body block, and whether it can continue in the direction that it's been going on for the last decades is really open to question. And I'd say it's, in that sense, it looks like it's received a very serious check.
I mean, Rupert Murdoch, Jonathan, prided himself on having a fearsome reputation. Do you think the fear barrier has been broken as a result by British politicians and journalists alike?
Well, they are like the Egyptians in Tahrir Square. It's an amazing thing to see. You see it among Conservatives and Labour alike. It's really as if a reign of terror or fear, maybe terror is too strong a word, has been broken. I think one of the fascinating things about the whole scandal is the degree to which the Murdoch empire was taking on the role and really supplanting the role of the state. You had them wiretapping, you had them assuming police functions, you had them wielding political power on a tremendous scale. You'll remember that Tony Blair, just after he was elected Prime Minister, made a trip to Australia to kind of kowtow to the master. And we saw, of course, that David Cameron hired Andy Coulson, who was the editor of the News of the World. So it's really been sort of a bipartisan reign of fear, and they do seem to be throwing it off just now.
Why was Murdoch able to flourish the way he has?
You know, I think it's part of a trend that goes way beyond Murdoch. And I think that what's happened is that people in political power and people with large media organizations have sort of discovered one another and have entered into a kind of collusion. You see this in spades in Italy with Berlusconi, where in that case you had the media empire kind of swallowing up the state in a sense and merging with the state. With Rupert Murdoch, you saw the same, something very similar that was threatening to happen. If you look at Putin's Russia, it's rather the state that swallowed up the media. But either way, it's this sort of two-headed monster that's been created. And I think it's something new on the face of the earth. I think it's something different from the propaganda machines of old, something subtler. I won't say more dangerous because those were pretty bad, but it's something very dangerous for democracy.
Now, the next person who is possibly going to be in the firing line is British Prime Minister David Cameron. He's cut short a trip to Africa. He's ordered a special parliamentary session in the next 24 hours. Is his political life been shortened, or has the life of his government been shortened as a result of this scandal?
Well, you know, that question is actually being raised, and Ed Miliband, the head of the Labour Party, has actually put it on the table, sort of hinted at it in statements that he's made, that Cameron ought to resign in much the same way as some of the police officers have had to resign and the executives of News Corp. I mean, I don't think we're at that stage yet, but, you know, we're only mid-scandal, and we don't know what other shoes there are ready to drop. And so it's not out of inconceivable, although right at the minute it doesn't look very likely.
What does it say about those close ties that exist between media and politicians?
Well, I think you've got a kind of unholy alliance that's been developing, and it's something that goes way beyond, as I say, the news of the world or Rupert Murdoch. There's been a kind of transformation of journalism into a corporate structure owned by gigantic combines, and they are players in politics on a big scale. And with the News Corporation sort of took it a step farther. Here in the United States we have Fox News, which is a kind of relentless purveyor of really of right-wing sort of party line. That's something different from the whole phone hacking, but it's all part of the same phenomena, which is the media sort of assuming the functions of a state. It's something new.
Do you see the anger that we're now seeing in Britain crossing the Atlantic and occurring in the United States?
You know, we haven't seen the same extent of it here, although it has reached into the United States, and there's been some very good reporting done on the way that other News Corporation entities have thrown their weight around here in the United States. They had to pay out $670 million in settlements of lawsuits that they didn't want to have exposed. And we saw that Les Hinton, the head of Dow Jones, which owns the Wall Street Journal, had to resign because he was on the scene there in News Corporation when the hacking was occurring. So it's kind of reached over here, but it hasn't reached anything like the proportions that we see in Britain.
Do you think there is a potential that it could, however?
Yes, I do. There's been one report, and it's not been corroborated, I should emphasize. There was one story in, I think it was the Daily Mirror in Britain, I hope I don't have that wrong, that a policeman here in the United States, or a former policeman, had been queried about hacking the victims of the 9/11 attacks in the United States. Well, if that turned out to be true, and we don't have confirmation of it, I should emphasize, that would put the British scandal in the shade and that would be the H-bomb. Then I wonder whether News Corporation could survive even as a corporate entity.
Now, you've argued in an opinion piece that's been published here in France and elsewhere that News Corp outlets were nothing more than mere propaganda vehicles. Are any of them, however, capable of producing good journalism, such as the Wall Street Journal or the Sunday Times?
Oh yes, there's a mixture, but there's an overwhelming predominance and preponderance of really right-wing sort of party line. And they exert, for instance, if you look at Fox News here in the United States, it's run by Roger Ailes, who was an operative of Richard Nixon and helped to bring him to power, and other Republican presidential and other candidates. And so there's a kind of seamless web in that case, which is really the most salient arm of the Rupert Murdoch empire here in the United States. There's been a political reach that goes very, very deep. But there are, of course, other journalistic enterprises, such as the London Times and so on, and the Wall Street Journal, where there is good journalism, but always there's this right-wing slant.
Now, veteran American journalist Carl Bernstein has said that this scandal bears more than a passing resemblance to Watergate. Would you agree, Jonathan?
Yes, absolutely. I do agree. I think that there's one difference, though, and that is that the allegations that, well, it's now fact, it's confirmed fact that there was the hacking into the telephone of the murdered girl, is, you know, they always say in reference to Watergate that the cover-up was worse than the crime, and that became something of a saying here in the United States. But here the crime was so repulsive in the first place that it's hard to see that the cover-up is going to be worse. But we don't know what else is still to come out. We already know, for instance, that Gordon Brown's information was hacked, and it was revealed that his son had cystic fibrosis, and one more particularly disgusting revelation. So we don't know how much more like that is to come.
Now, as you pointed out earlier, we're amid scandal, if you like. But once we do get past this and the dust has settled, how do you think the media and political landscapes will look on either side of the Atlantic?
Boy, that's a good question, and it's hard to say. What I'd like to think, and maybe I should express my hope, is that this kind of merger of state and media enterprises would be checked, at least to some extent, but maybe that's too optimistic.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for, Jonathan SCHELL. Thank you so much for joining us, and that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up shortly.